This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. One of the things I've had the fortune to do in my short career on YouTube is foster some great relationships with people who cover other teams in the AFC North that do great work. I always make it a point to make sure I have that. The reason I do is because while what I think about the Browns is important to me, and while what we as fans and people who cover the team think about the Browns are important to some extent, it's also important to understand what the perception of the team is outside of Cleveland and what the perception of other teams are from people who are just as close to their team as I am to the team that I cover. So over the last week or so, I've had Engraven on. I've had my guy New Strike City Ace from AFC North Talk and Cincinnati podcast on. And I've had Jared Bailey, who covers the Pittsburgh Steelers, on. And through those interviews, through talking to those guys, through listening to what those guys have posted about their own teams, I have learned a lot about where the AFC North is and where the Browns stand in comparison to that. And I think that there is truly a golden opportunity here for the Cleveland Browns. Now, it's not a guarantee. They could fall on the same landmines I think other teams are trying to avoid as well. But there is an opportunity if you're the Cleveland Browns. I'll kind of carve out this opportunity by talking about where other teams are. Right? When you talk about Pittsburgh, when I talked to Jared about the Steelers, it was obvious that they're in this weird phase where they're still Pittsburgh, they're still a 9 to 10 win team, they're still a playoff contender, but they're struggling to get over that hump. And they don't know if they've done enough this offseason to get over that hump. Yes, bringing in Russ is an upgrade from Kenny Pickett, but it's not the kind of transformative upgrade at quarterback that's going to change your fortunes completely for Pittsburgh from being what they were last year to what they probably are going to be this year, which is what they've been since Mike Tomlin has taken over the team without Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback, which is a pretty good team with a good defense. And an offense that struggles to strive for consistency, and that leaves them at 9 to 10 wins and likely like a 7-seed playoff berth. I think that's where Pittsburgh is. I think that's where a lot of people who cover Pittsburgh think they are. And I don't know what they could do to really change that, like outside of a crazy year from Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, or maybe like you bring in some crazy trades or something. I don't know what they could do to break out of it. And I think that's what they're trying to figure out right now in Pittsburgh is how do we break out of this, right? Because yes, it's cool to not go under 500, but you don't get a ring for not going under 500. Like after a while, it starts to not feel as good. Right? Those 7-seed playoff berths, it just doesn't hit the same. We've experienced something like this in Cleveland where if the Browns went 11-5 and got eliminated in the first round in 2018, we would have been thrilled. But fast forward to 2023, and we're not thrilled for that result because we've been there. We've made the playoffs. We've won a playoff game. We want the team to progress further, and I think that's where Pittsburgh fans are. They're happy that they're not falling into the abyss of the NFL, but they are worried that they're falling into a very familiar pattern. And from what I've seen in my opinions of it, and from what most people in Pittsburgh's opinions of it, it doesn't seem like, even if they're optimistic, I still don't get the feeling that they think that they're going to break that 10 wins ceiling that they've been kind of sitting under, or at least that first round exit ceiling. That's a better way to put it, right? Because they won more than 10 games in 2020, but they've been a first round bounce team basically since 2015 or whenever they lost to Jacksonville. That's who they've been. And, it's been a while. It's been almost 10 years for Pittsburgh. And I think they're kind of frustrated with hitting that ceiling. And I don't know if the moves that they have made are aggressive and bold enough to take them out of that direction. I think they're just safe enough to keep you in the same spot, but just aggressive enough to make sure that you don't really get that far, right? Like I don't really see Russ being the thing that breaks that ceiling. Or Justin Fields, when Justin Fields had a ton of issues, organization related and himself as a prospect related in Chicago. And Russell Wilson had a ton of issues in Denver. He had a ton of issues at the end of that run in Seattle. He's had a ton of issues for a little while now. And to think that he's just going to suddenly revert to what he was 10 years ago overnight because he's wearing a different jersey, to me, doesn't seem very realistic. And I think most people who are serious about the Steelers understand that. They're still a good team. They're not going to be trash, right? They're going to be a 9 to 10 win team. But I think that's the problem that Pittsburgh is having, is that they keep hitting their head on that first round bounce playoff team ceiling. Now let's move on to the Cincinnati Bengals. And this was the recap and review of a team that kind of surprised me the most. I personally think that the Bengals are in a good position to contend again. They got Joe Burrow coming back. I think we've really forgotten how good Joe Burrow can be at times when he's playing really good football. But when I talked to Ace, he had a lot more concerns about the team. One of the biggest issues with Cincinnati last year, and look, Cincinnati's at their best when their defense is the best part of that team. That's what happened in 21. That's what happened in 22. And it doesn't seem like they're super confident in that defense, even though they've made some upgrades. They brought some guys back. That run defense for them is a big sticking point. They're very concerned about their ability to stop the run with the loss of DJ Reader. And I don't blame them. Their run defense was not great last year, especially when DJ Reader was out. It's not projected to be great this year. They are concerned with some of the issues at wide receiver, right? They might not have Tyler Boyd back, who's a free agent currently. He hasn't signed a deal. T. Higgins, who knows what his situation is going to be. Right now, it looks like they'll have him for this year, but they might not have T. Higgins. And going from T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Tyler Boyd to just Jamar Chase is like a drastic shift of fortune at wide receiver. Now, you're still fine when you have Jamar Chase, but it's not the same. They let go of Joe Mixon. They still have some concerns about the offensive line. When I asked Ace this question, this answer surprised me. I asked him, where do you think the Bengals are? Do you think this is a year where they have a serious chance to get a Super Bowl? Or is this a year, like many teams when they have a franchise quarterback, where you don't feel like the team is really going all in? Like maybe if they get some good luck, they could win the Super Bowl, but you don't really think that they're super serious about doing it this year. And he said the latter was the answer for him. He thinks that they're kind of in a holding pattern right now, like they're in a soft transition. And that's going to be a word that comes up again when we talk about the Baltimore Ravens. But he felt like the Bengals were in a soft transition, which means, hey, they're moving on from the three wide receivers, the three amigos, the Migos era there in Cincinnati. And they might be starting to transition to something different. So for this next year or two, they'll be a good team. They'll be a really good team. They'll be in contention for the division, all that. They might even win the division, but they're not the team that they want to be yet because they're doing a little bit of a soft rebuild when it comes to changing out some pieces that they can no longer afford with the cap realities of Joe Burrow and all these other guys. Well, the cash realities really for Cincinnati is less than cap because their cap situation's fine. But their cash realities are starting to become and bear heavier on them, which surprised me. I thought that he felt like the Bengals were full tilt, but his hesitancy there was interesting. And then I talked to Engraven, and I felt this way about the Ravens. I felt like there was a possibility that last year that current version of them had peaked. They were going to have a hard time hanging on to TJ McDonald. They were going to have a hard time hanging on to a lot of defensive free agents that they had. They were going to have a hard time bringing in free agents. Like, it felt like last year was the year it really needed to happen for Baltimore because some realities of the business of the NFL were just going to hit them heavy in the offseason. And that's what happened with Baltimore. They lost their defensive coordinator, who looked to be one of the best in the NFL, and he got rewarded with a head coaching job for that work. They lost Pat Queen and Jadeveon Clowney for a team that doesn't really have a premier edge rusher. That's a big loss, those two combined, because when we talk about the Ravens' plan for rushing the passer, Pat Queen and Jadeveon Clowney are like their two most important pieces in that equation. And to have both of those guys not just playing for other teams, but other AFC teams. Well, no, never mind. Jadeveon went to Carolina. But to have Pat Queen leave and then leave for Pittsburgh, which I do think it's a good pickup, I just wonder, like, did Baltimore get better? I think that's a real question. They lost, what Engraven told me, they lost 3 offensive linemen in free agency, 3 starters in free agency. So they're only returning 2 starters on the offensive line. Yes, they got Derrick Henry, but they don't have Odell Beckham. They're not going to bring him back. Maybe they bring in Michael Gallup to replace him, but wide receiver production has been an issue for Baltimore. It doesn't seem like it's been very prioritized in free agency. Like, it seems like they're just running the same plan. So I don't really expect anything to change from a wide receiving standpoint. We'll talk about Lamar in just a little bit here, but defensively, yes, you brought back Justin Madubuike, but you lost a couple safeties. You lost Pat Queen. You lost pretty much your entire edge rush. It's a problem for Baltimore. Are they going to be a good team? Yes, because Lamar Jackson is really good at football. They're going to have some really good defensive players still. They're going to be a good team, similar to the Cincinnati Bengals. But are they a team that I think their ceiling is winning the Super Bowl this year? I have real questions. Like, I think they're in that similar soft reboot holding pattern that Cincinnati is in currently, where they're trying to figure out ways to kind of reload. I think that's what Baltimore's doing. Like, they're going to keep some guys. They're not going to really overextend for older free agents. I don't think that they see this year as championship or bust, and I don't think that they see this year as a pivotal win-now window year for them. And their lack of aggressiveness in free agency compared to what they've done the last 2 years says that. It's tough. Another element that you have to consider with Baltimore is how things ended last year. That stuff kind of matters, especially when you get all the way to the conference championship game, especially when you get the Kansas City Chiefs at home and you feel like this is your best shot to take them out and you don't do it. That is a level of demoralizing that can really affect players' psyche going forward. So I wonder about that. Look, I'm not getting a feeling from anybody who is serious about covering the Baltimore Ravens or Engraven that they feel like this year seems like one of those years where Baltimore is going all in to win a championship. This feels like a year where Baltimore is kind of in a holding pattern. Same thing as Cincinnati. It's interesting. There's also a Lamar Jackson element that we have to talk about. And you know me, ever since I had the bad take about Kyler Murray being better than Lamar Jackson. I've been on Lamar Jackson's side with a lot of arguments and even argued with Browns fans about Lamar Jackson. But I do think that there's one thing that Lamar Jackson has that kind of has proven to be his Achilles heel, and that is his desire to prove things to people. And look, having a chip on your shoulder is usually something that we look at as a good thing. But we've seen this in Cleveland with somebody like Myles Garrett. Remember early in Myles Garrett's career where he was obsessed with his sack numbers? Like he would just nonstop talk about his sack numbers in the offseason. He would talk about training camp, how many sacks he feels like he should get. And that really had a negative effect on him because he became too obsessed with the sack numbers to the point to where it was affecting his play, and also it was making him act out of character, out of frustration, like when he smacked Mason Rudolph over the head with the helmet. Part of that frustration and why he was in that situation to begin with was he was mad that he ain't get a sack in that game, despite the fact that the Browns blew them out in that game. And you see a similar thing happen with Lamar Jackson. Now, again, it's ironic that like Myles Garrett won the Defensive Player of the Year award without getting that many sacks. He only got like 13, which is not a crazy number, which kind of validates the new approach that he's had because he's been a more impactful player since he stopped being so focused on the sacks and got more focused on just his impact as a player. He's been so much better these last couple of years. Well, something like that's going on with Lamar Jackson too. When you look at Lamar Jackson, I see somebody who really wants to prove the haters wrong. I see somebody who really wants to show people how good of a quarterback he is. And I think when he tries to do that, he makes some pivotal mistakes. Like he cares too much how he wins a game versus if he wins a game. There are times where he could run and break the game right there that he just chooses not to and chooses to throw a ball 50 yards downfield to prove a point, it feels like. When teams call him out for not being a passer, he goes out of his way to throw the ball 40 times, and sometimes it does work out. He's a great passer. But his need to prove something to people holds him back because it makes him focus on one thing he's good at instead of all the things that he's good at. And when I see Lamar Jackson, I wonder if that's something that he can overcome. Like, can he just not care? Because if Lamar Jackson did not care how he beat the Kansas City Chiefs, I think the Ravens would have beat the Kansas City Chiefs. He might have had 150 yards of rushing and maybe 200 yards of passing, but they would have beat the Chiefs. But I think he was a little bit too focused on what the narrative would be. He was a little bit too focused on what people would think, and he was a little bit too focused on proving people wrong that leaked into his mentality during the game. And I don't think that led to him playing his best football. We see the best of Lamar Jackson when we play him in Cleveland because those games are at 1 o'clock. He don't got to prove shit to nobody, so he just be balling. Right? That's when we see the best out of Lamar Jackson. But when he's playing on national TV in front of everybody and his legacy's on the line, like in the playoffs, that's when he starts to try to prove stuff. And I think that's when he gets in trouble the most. So for the Ravens, I think the big question is like, hey, can Lamar Jackson get a handle on that? Because I really do think that that's starting to affect him in some big moments. And it's becoming something that is less excusable the more years he plays in the league, because now he's not a young player trying to prove something. He's a vet, a 2-time MVP. He should be confident in who he is and that he's a great quarterback, regardless of what some trolls on the internet have to say or some people at ESPN have to say. But that's not how it comes off when you watch him play sometimes. It does feel like he's trying to prove a point, and I think that's held Baltimore back. So now let's talk about where the Browns sit in this picture, because I don't think Cincinnati is throwing it all at this season to win it all. That doesn't mean that they're not going to be a great team, but that just means resource-wise, they have not put everything into getting it all this year. I look at Baltimore, and it's clear to me that they're not really going in all in this year. Like, yeah, they got Derrick Henry, but if they were serious about going all in this year, they would have brought in a more enticing name than Michael Gallup on a visit. They would have been more aggressive at wide receiver. They would have been more aggressive with the offensive line. Like, you don't lose 3 of your starting offensive linemen and then tell me that you're winning now when you haven't even replaced them. Like, that's not an all-in move right there that they've done this offseason. So I don't think they're going all in. Pittsburgh is Pittsburgh. They're going to be a good team. They're going to be a 9-10 win team, but they're not a championship threat. And then I look at the Browns and I'm like, that's the one team in the AFC North where I think to myself, they're trying to win it all. Again, doesn't mean that they're going to have the best chance to win it all. Doesn't mean that they're going to be the team that does it, but it does mean that they're the team that's trying to do it. And that means that there's an opportunity for this team this year because maybe Baltimore plateaued. Maybe this current version of the Cincinnati Bengals has plateaued, same as Baltimore. Maybe the Browns are the one team on the rise, getting healthy and changing things on the offense. And maybe this is an opportunity for the Cleveland Browns to do something that they haven't done in a very long time. I mean, ever since it's been called the AFC North, and win it all. But the opportunity is there. They're the one team really trying to spend to get to that point. So it's going to be interesting to see how this season shakes out. It's the AFC North. There's no guarantees. It's the toughest division in football. 4 years of continuity across all 4 teams, and all 4 teams are very, very talented. Have all pros across the deck. But that's what makes football fun, right? So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.